12:09 a.m. There's got to be something wrong with me. Seriously, I'm 22 years old and still afraid of the dark. I'm not a little kid anymore, but I can't work up the courage to just turn off the lights and go to sleep. Okay, let me explain how I came to this. One minute I was enjoying myself, writing a paper on Paleolithic cave paintings for my art history class, and then without warning I imagined that there was something spooky waiting for me in the hallway of my apartment, effectively trapping myself in my own bedroom. You see, I did more than just creep myself out, because with me, fear has a tendency to spiral out of control into levels of mind-boggling stupidity. Advertisements. At first, I just ignored it, going on with my work in the hopes that the feeling of being stalked would go away on its own. It didn't, and I was starting to worry that some shrieking terror was about to burst through the door, so I had to double-check to make sure that it was securely locked. After that, I couldn't concentrate on getting my paper written, as every other minute I'd have to look away from my monitor to see if the door was still closed. "This is getting retarded," I said out loud to no one in particular. "It's just my imagination fucking with me." Which is honestly the truth here. I know that if I were to open that door and look into the hall, nothing would happen. One single action and poof, sanity becomes restored. The problem, of course, is the actual opening part. That's always when the anxiety reaches its high point. This bullshit started about 30 minutes ago, just before midnight, and it doesn't look like it's about to let up anytime soon. So yeah, I'm stuck in my bedroom for what seems like the 100th time, alone with my computer and thoughts of strange boogeymen. Actually, this whole thing got me wondering where these irrational paranoid delusions first started. That's an interesting story, actually, and it happened long before anyone could call me crazy. There's something in the basement. This story happened in the spring of 1998 in the old house on Erie Street that my parents were renting. Erie as in Lake Erie, but yeah, weird coincidence, right? I was 6 years old at the time, so I was at a point in my life where sleeping with a nightlight was still considered normal. I think that we had only been living there for a few weeks. It's kind of hard to remember for sure exactly, but I do remember the first time my dad took me and my brother to check out the basement. Now the house itself was well over 100 years old, and in a previous lifetime it served as a train station. The basement, as it turned out, was used as a temporary jail cell where the town sheriff would keep the criminals he caught trying to catch a ride out to Chicago, and in the time between then and when my family moved in, no one had thought to update the basement. Basically, it was dungeon. The walls were made out of carved rocks or something, with certain areas bricked over from where groundwater had been leaking through. Also, the whole place was coated in layers of spiderwebs and dead insects. That's not even the creepiest part. In the way back around a narrow corner was a heavy door labeled Milker Room, whatever that meant. In any case, my dad couldn't get it open, even with a crowbar. The hinges were so rusted and caked in calcium that nothing short of a jackhammer was going to get through it. During the daylight hours, I didn't worry about the basement or the cryptic Milker Room. I just avoided going down there. But at night, I couldn't help thinking about it, and invariably I'd end up hiding under my sheets until I could eventually fall asleep. Of course, I wasn't always able to fall asleep. Sometimes the voices would keep me wide-eyed and alert. And when I say voices, I mean what I thought constituted the sound of a man's muffled speech coming from the cellar. To me, it sounded like someone under the floorboards was mumbling incoherently. The reality here, of course, was that sounds were bouncing around the air vents in such a way as to trick my little kid brain into thinking that there really was someone down there, trapped behind that huge, immovable door, trying to get out in order to… I'm not sure exactly. Perhaps I thought he wanted to eat me, I guess. Who knows? I was 6, remember? It doesn't matter what I thought this made-up man wanted. All I knew at the time was that it was bad. And it got worse when my older brother Joshua kept telling me that he knew what was really in the basement. He was a sadistic asshole, and he thought it was just so damn funny to tell me that a monster with a woman's face and a body covered in tufts of fur was trying to escape from the Milker Room. Let me repeat that. A woman's face and a body covered in tufts of fur. It was weeks before I could sleep a full night without yelling for my parents to rush to my room. person from hurting themselves while they dream. The experience is known to cause feelings of being choked or a sense of panic, and is often accompanied by hypnagogic hallucinations. Needless to say, I didn't like it one damn bit. Let's move forward a few years. When I was 9, my parents had decided to move to a better house for commuting reasons. I was helping my dad move some boxes out of the basement, and at this point the place had been cleaned up a great deal, and being 3 years older, I didn't find the basement all that scary. Until I found myself alone down there while my dad ran off to talk to my mom about something. At first I was fine, but then out of nowhere I started to hear this weird tapping noise. I remember looking around for what was causing it, more annoyed than frightened, when I looked around the corner towards the milker room. It started getting louder, and it was coming from behind the huge black door. I didn't move for what felt like hours, petrified, when all of a sudden I heard a crashing bang come from where the tapping used to be. I shrieked and started running back towards the stairs, nearly knocking over my dad in process. When he asked me what was wrong, I told him about the noises coming from the milker room. He laughed. I swear he laughed and told me to follow him. Going around the corner, my dad walked right towards the milker room door, opened it, flicked on the lights, and showed me the loudest water softener in the world. He told me that he had it installed 2 years ago because he was sick of drinking rust-flavored water, and the milker room was the best place in the house to put it. How'd he get it open in the first place? Well, a lot of hardware stores sell solvents designed specifically for rust and calcium. I had nothing to be afraid of, never really did. But to this day, I can remember with perfect clarity that one single moment of pure terror where I was absolutely sure that something terrible lurked behind a few inches of wood and shadows. 12:42 a.m. So the point of that story was to remind myself that there's nothing evil waiting for me outside of my bedroom. I don't think it worked. I tried to open it about a minute ago to use the bathroom, but the second I placed my hand around the doorknob, my heart started racing like I had just pounded 6 shots of espresso. Images of a writhing mass of rot and flies filled my mind, or a blackhound waiting to pounce from the darkness. I'm freaking out a little inside because not only do I have a feeling that there's something out there, but also the sense that whatever it is, it knows that I'm scared. I keep telling myself that it's all in my head, that I'm just projecting my fears onto the environment. But it's not working, which is a shame because I know firsthand how frightening one's own imagination can be. So here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to pee in the beer bottle I found in my trash can, and second, I'm going to write down another story, one where I had to go toe-to-toe with my own nocturnal demons. Sleep paralysis. About 4 years ago, I was trapped in a state of almost near total depression. I had just graduated from high school, but my grades were so low that my choices for college were very much limited to the first place that accepts me category. Add to this that I was unemployed, my best friend had already left the state, and my parents were in the process of getting a divorce. In hindsight, I handled the whole situation in an extremely immature way by smoking a ridiculous amount of weed and barricading myself into my room to play video games all damn day. In other words, I was starting to turn into a complete loser. Now, some schools of thought suggest that nightmares serve as a subconscious mechanism to resolve perceived stressors. If this is true, then I was lucky that things hadn't started to get strange earlier. One night after a long, hard day of bong hits and masturbation, I fell asleep just as I always had. Except this time I woke up right in the middle of things. And by that I mean my brain woke up while the rest of me kept right on sleeping. I would later discover that this phenomenon was called sleep paralysis, which occurs when a person wakes up during the middle of the REM cycle and cannot move his or her limbs due to the sympathetic nervous system having shut down muscle control in order to keep the person from hurting themselves while they dream. The experience is known to cause feelings of being choked or a sense of panic, and is often accompanied by hypnagogic hallucinations. Needless to say, I didn't like it one damn bit. I couldn't open my eyes, I couldn't move my arms, and I started to feel a sort of presence enter my room. I wanted to scream but couldn't, and the entity was surrounding me, observing me, judging me. I didn't know what it was, but somehow the thought got into my head that it wanted to hurt me. I struggled to break free, yelling at myself internally to wake up before it got any closer, but I couldn't move so much as a finger. Then I felt a pressure, or tightness on my chest, like the life was being crushed out of me by something huge and angry. If someone were to try to read my thoughts at this point, all they would hear would be the sounds of a wild animal backed into a corner, vicious and scared, borderlining madness. Right when I thought that I was about to die, I heard myself scream, "Wake up!" Whether from inside or out, I don't know, but suddenly I bolted upright in bed, feeling very dazed and tired. I looked around my room, looking for whatever it was that was trying to kill me, but everything seemed fine, so I decided to get a glass of water. Almost immediately after getting out from beneath the covers, I started to hear a very deep, almost painful moan coming from the hallway outside of my bedroom, followed by a thud and footsteps. At this point, I was more angry than scared, so I grabbed a baseball bat and moved towards the door. I didn't rush out into the hall immediately, because by now it was slamming itself against my door, trying to get in, all the while its moans sounding more and more like it was in a state of constant agony. Eventually, I heard it start to shuffle away so fast as lightning. I threw open the door and rushed into the hall. That's when I saw it. It was very, very tall, so tall that it had to crouch a little to avoid the ceiling. Also, it was thin, more bone than flesh. It didn't have arms or skin or even a face, really. I suppose that the best description here would be that it was an elongated skeleton wearing a straitjacket made of bacon. Whatever it was, it had turned around and was beginning to shuffle towards me, so I ran forward swinging my bat like a madman until it had stopped moving, gurgling in a puddle of its own blood. Advertisements. I woke up the next morning around dawn, lying face down on the hallway carpet next to my bat. Apparently, I had dreamed the whole encounter, and now there was a hole in the wall from where my bat had punched out a chunk. I haven't had a case of sleep paralysis since, nor did I ever witness the bacon monster again, but it just goes to show what sort of nightmares my own brain is able to conjure. 1:38 a.m. Well, that clearly didn't help. No, I'm not worried about the bacon demon hiding out there. I already stomped his bitch ass into the ground. But I'm still unable to just open the door. I can't sleep if I think there's something out there. I can't force myself to stay awake until sunrise either. I really don't have a clue here. Should have tried to just pulled a neck muscle from turning my head too fast. I thought I saw something moving in the corner of my eye. It was just a shoe. An unmoving, unlaced, dirty whore of a shoe. Okay, enough screwing around. I just found a hammer. Wish I had a shotgun, but I guess a hammer will have to do. I'm going to try opening the door again. I'll be back in a minute. 1:39 a.m. Nope, not gonna happen. I started sweating before I could even touch the handle. I really tried, but it was too much. Even worse, now I'm hearing noises coming from outside of my window. Good thing the blinds are closed. I wish my roommate would just come back. He works a late shift, so he usually doesn't get home until around 5 in the morning. Wait, hold on, that's only like another 3.5 hours or so. Yeah, I'll just wait for him to get off work and then I can finally put this nonsense behind me. Then again, it's not such a great idea to have too much faith in your friends, especially when they know just how easily you can be startled. Like my friend Stephanie, who decided to tell me one of her own horror stories just as I was about to head home for the night. The Union Street Cemetery. The Union Street Cemetery is the oldest graveyard in town. It's also the shittiest. Over the years, a combination of vandalism, poor upkeep, and harsh weather have made the headstones virtually unreadable, and the surrounding patches of grass that haven't been overrun by weeds are a sickly yellow color, similar to bile. The cemetery itself sits squarely on top of a slight hill, and despite the fact that it's been there for ages, most people in town don't even know where it is, if they even know that it exists at all. This might have something to do with the fact that the entire area surrounding the Union Street Cemetery has been unofficially designated as the town ghetto. In other words, the houses in that area are made homes by the lower-income families. My friend Stephanie was one of them for a while. When Stephanie was in her early 20s, she led the glorious life of a single mother, working as many hours as possible as a diner waitress. And in order to survive, she had to move herself and her 4-year-old son into a house on Union Street with 2 roommates. Or maybe she wasn't single at this point. I'm a little fuzzy on the details here, but I do know that she lived in one of the Union Street houses with her son. So the story as told by Stephanie was that one night while her husband slash boyfriend slash roommates were all out of the house, Stephanie was in the kitchen trying to make some diner while her son played in the living room. Now her son, Tyler, at least I think his name was Tyler, was being loud as usual, banging toy trucks into each other like little boys are known to do, so naturally Stephanie became worried when everything got quiet. When she walked into the living room to see if Tyler was doing all right, she saw him looking out of the front window from in between the curtains and the glass pane. Keep in mind that their house was right across the street from the cemetery. "What you looking at, Tyler?" she asked. "They're coming over," he responded, still looking out of the window. "Who's coming over, Tyler?" "The people from across the street," he said. It was here that Stephanie looked out of the front window expecting to see actual people, but instead saw only gates to the graveyard. Now, Stephanie isn't some dumb bimbo from a cheesy zombie movie. She's a real person. And like most people in real life, she's seen her fair share of horror films. She wasn't going to shrug this off as just another child saying strange things. She was going to get the hell out of there, which she did. Stephanie grabbed Tyler, an overnight bag, and spent the night at her mother's house. She returned the next morning after whoever else lived there had told her that everything was fine, that the walls weren't bleeding or anything else even remotely supernatural. Even still, Stephanie moved out of that house within a year. She told me this story one night just before I was about to leave my ex-girlfriend's house. Stephanie was a good friend of my ex's. That was how I came to know her. So I was more than a little nervous to walk home alone in the dark. Actually, it really wasn't a big deal until her story ran through my head when I was about halfway home, which got me wondering just where I was exactly in position to the Union Street Cemetery, so that I could plan my walk in order to avoid it. I remember thinking that I was pretty close to Union Street, so I stopped walking briefly to try and locate any notable landmarks. I was trying to look over a hill when it happened. At the worst possible moment, the clouds parted enough so that some faint moonlight outlined the silhouettes of several headstones resting on top of the hill. As it would turn out, I was facing the backside of the graveyard, standing so close that I could have thrown a rock over the fence without even trying. Of course, I freaked out. I honestly didn't realize just how close I was to the cemetery. It was just that dark. I turned and ran without looking back. I didn't stop running until I had reached the highway. 2:57 a.m. I'm not going to get out of this room tonight. I just can't do it. There's something terrible out there, not just in the hall, but also outside my window, staring from behind the blinds, waiting for me to let it in. I've been griping the handle of my hammer so hard for so long that I know every groove in the carved wood better than I know my own face. The light bulb of my desk lamp blew out about 15 minutes ago, so now the only source of light is what little comes from this screen. I'm starting to think that it's already gotten in here. Yes, it is. It's definitely in here. Maybe it's always been in here. With me. I can't face the darkness. That's how it gets you. It only becomes real if you look at it. If even for just a moment. It will flicker to life, like a movie reel that skips a frame. There for a heartbeat, and then gone. But that's all it wants. All it's ever wanted. It will blink into existence for only a fraction of a second, but the damage will last forever. Where do you think these stories come from? They're just the fallout of what I'm trying to forget. Something that doesn't want to be forgotten. I'm not going to let it get to me again. It only becomes real if you look at it, so I won't. I'll just keep my eyes on the screen, and I'll try to ignore the shapes moving around the edges of my vision. I'll be fine as long as I'm looking at the screen because it only becomes real if you look at it. It's only real when it looks back. Credit to Stephen D. Harris. I remember the first time I saw the Mourne Mountains in the mist. It was a Friday just after the rain had passed, and the clouds were still clinging to the peaks like a shroud over a corpse. I was young then, just 15, but already too familiar with the violent world of Northern Ireland, a world that made your skin crawl and your heart beat like a drum at night. The troubles were in full swing, and the air was thick with fear, suspicion, and the crackle of gunfire. It was my Uncle Dan who first took me to the mountains. He was a quiet man, the kind whose silence made you nervous, as if he were hiding something just out of reach. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they could break a neck in a second. I'd always known that Dan was involved in things my mother warned me to stay away from, even if she didn't say it outright. "We're going to the mountains of Mourne tomorrow at dusk," he'd said, his voice low and grave, like a whisper from the grave itself. "Some business that needs attending to. Advertisements." I didn't ask questions. No one did. Not with the way things were at the time. My cousins had been involved with the IRA for years, but Dan, though he wasn't as vocal about it, was tied to the underground in ways most people couldn't imagine. I just knew that if he said business, you did it no matter what. His calls were cryptic, but they were never ignored. We drove out of Belfast in the early evening, the sky darkening like the bruises on a child's skin. As we got closer to the mountains, the landscape began to twist and change. The rolling hills gave way to jagged rocks and cliffs that seemed to claw at the sky. It was like a place out of time, untouched by anything human. We parked the car by a small stone wall, the engine's dying hum mixing with the faint sounds of birds calling from the trees. Dan didn't say a word as we climbed over the wall and made our way up the rough path that led into the hills. The air was colder now, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. We passed the ruins of old stone cottages, their windows shattered, their roofs caved in. Remnants of a time long gone, but not a time before the British had come, I knew. Every step seemed to echo in the emptiness, like the mountains themselves were watching us. Eventually, after a long, wordless hike, we went off the course up to the peak, instead veering into the woods in a slightly flatter area. A few minutes later, we reached a small clearing, a patch of land where the grass grew tall and wild. There were trees in every direction, but where we stood, we could see clearly up to the night sky. In the center of the clearing, there were a bunch of large rocks of about the same size, some toppled over in a vague circle. But the way the ground devoted in some spots and shaped around the rocks told me that at some point in time they must have been placed more uniformly. Dan stopped, his eyes scanning the murky woods. He pulled something from his jacket, a package wrapped in brown paper, and laid it carefully on the ground. "Wait here," he muttered. I didn't argue. I knew better than to ask questions. But something about the place set my nerves on edge. It was as if the land itself was alive, and it didn't want us there. The wind whispered through the trees, and I could hear the faint crackling of static in the air, as if the mountains themselves were speaking in a language I couldn't understand. Advertisements. I turned my back for just a moment, trying to steady my breath, and that's when I heard it, a voice, low and guttural, like a growl or a murmur coming from somewhere deep in the woods. "Dan." I breathed, but my voice was swallowed by the wind. My eyes scanned the trees, but I saw nothing. My heart raced. I wasn't sure if I'd heard it at all, or if the stress of the situation had finally gotten to me. But I knew something was wrong. The air felt thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on my chest. I could hear the wind pick up, swirling around us in a frenzy. And then, I saw it. It was a figure, that much I could make out. It was standing out in the trees, half hidden in the shadows. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. "Dan," I said again, but the words came out strangled, as if something had lodged in my chest. My uncle was still standing by the package, his back turned to me, unaware. The figure in the trees moved closer. It moved in an unnatural way. You know how in older video games, characters don't exactly walk, They sort of just glide forward while displaying a walking animation. It was like that. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone, unable to move, as if the mountains themselves had taken root in my bones. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. No footsteps, no rustling of leaves, like it had melted back into the earth. "Come on, lad," Dan called, his voice flat. "Job's done." I blinked, my heart still pounding, and when I looked up again, the clearing was empty. The figure was gone, as if it had never been there. My mind was spinning, but I forced myself to walk over to my uncle. He gave me a sharp look, but I said nothing. There were a lot of things you just didn't talk about in Northern Ireland back then. Later, when we were driving back down the mountain road, I asked him, almost against my will, who was that man? Was he one of ours? Dan didn't answer at first. He just kept his eyes on the road, the headlights cutting through the mist like two white knives. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Not everything that roams these lands are of society, of our factions, lad. Some things never left, and some things, they come back. Forget about tonight. What happened tonight stays here, up in the Mornas." I didn't ask any more questions after that. But I've never forgotten the look in his eyes that night, the terror behind them. Not then, not now, and not 5 years later when I returned to that place. I joined the IRA in 1973 as soon as I turned 18. The troubles were in full bloom, each day a new round of bloodshed and madness. In the streets of Belfast, you couldn't go a day without hearing the crack of gunfire or the screech of tires as another bomb went off. You could feel it in the air, a tension so thick it seemed to press down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. People looked at each other like they were waiting for a reason to pull a trigger. It was the kind of place that could make even the toughest man turn soft, or worse, make him tough in ways you didn't want to know, and for a long time I knew I wanted to fight for our cause. Back then I would have died for a united Ireland, without hesitation. But that changed when I returned to the mountains of Mourne. It was the winter of '76, the year everything started to spiral out of control. The British had made it clear that they weren't backing down, and neither were we. The war had become a game of attrition, tit-for-tat, ambushes, bombings, checkpoints, and killings. The usual. I was a lieutenant in the Belfast unit at the time, just a kid by the standards of the older men, but I had a reputation. You didn't make it as far as I did without learning how to kill with precision, how to move in silence, how to erase every trace of your presence in the world. But that wasn't what mattered to the ones who called the shots. What mattered was my loyalty, and when they said jump, I jumped. "Tommy," said Callahan, one of the senior men in the barracks, his eyes burning with some fever I couldn't place. He was a hard bastard, the kind who didn't flinch at much. His face was a craggy map of scars, the kind of man you wanted on your side if things went south. "You're going up to the Mournes tomorrow night. There's a job for you, a special one, just you." I remember the weight of his words, the way he said it, like it wasn't a question but a command. There wasn't a shred of doubt in his voice. I nodded, not wanting to ask too many questions. I remember thinking it was odd being sent alone. I'd always been part of a team, guys you could rely on when the shots rang out. But not this time. Callahan didn't give me much more than that, just a nod, a brief handshake, and a look that told me not to ask questions. I didn't. That's how things worked. You didn't ask, you just did. And yes, of course I'd always harbored a weird feeling towards the mountains of Mourne. Even though I had stowed away the memories of my visit to the place with my uncle 5 years ago in some corner of my brain, the idea of returning to the place filled me with dread. I didn't like it, but that didn't matter. I had orders. About a month passed, and the date of the mission rolled around. I packed light, a pistol, a spare mag, a grenade, and a map of the area. Sure, I knew what the objective was. Go to the location on the mountain chosen by the information broker and collect the document. But in truth, I had no idea what I was really walking into. None of us ever really did. But Callahan was always able to remind us that it wasn't just one mission, one robbery, one shootout. It was a war, no matter what label the Brits put on it. And when a man like that tells you to do something, you just do it. I grabbed my pack and made the long drive down the narrow roads toward the mountains, the sky bruised purple with the coming night. As I came to the outskirts of Belfast, the night grew wet and cold. The rain beat down on the windshield like it was angry, like the weather itself was trying to stop me, but I didn't care. I was used to it. As the city faded behind me, the air grew heavier. That was around the time the weight of things settled in my chest. Back to that place, back to the mountains of fucking Mourne. I drove through Newry, but it wasn't long before the familiar roads fell away and the land opened up in front of me, a cold, dark expanse of rocky terrain blanketed in mist. The Mournese, rising high and impossible, looming over me, an old nightmare I couldn't wake from. When I arrived at the foot of Slieve Donard, the highest peak, I left the car parked by the side of the road and started on foot. The night had already swallowed the daylight, and the mountains seemed to hold their breath as I walked. The air grew colder with each step, and the silence pressed against me like a physical thing. There was no wind, no sound of animals, no rustling of the trees. It was as though the mountain itself was waiting, watching. As I climbed the trail, the mist grew thicker, curling around me like a living thing, a slow-moving fog that swallowed everything in its path. The crunch of my boots against the stones was the only sound for miles. The mountains stretched ahead of me, vast and cold, their peaks shrouded in the darkness of night. Every step felt heavier, like the land itself was pulling me down. I didn't know why I was here, why this was the location chosen by an information broker. I'd asked Callahan once a few weeks back when the orders first came through, but he just gave me that look, the one that told me to keep my mouth shut. "You'll understand when you get there," he said, and that was all. I knew the terrain well enough. I'd done plenty of jobs in the various hills around Belfast, plenty of walking through fog and shadow, and I'd never forgotten that night with Dan years ago. It scared me. I feel no shame in admitting it, but orders were orders. This felt different to any mission before, though. There was something about the air, something about the way the landscape seemed to close in on me, that made me feel like prey. I reached the spot the map marked for my destination by the time the moon was full overhead, casting long, thin shadows across the ground, an open area close to the very peak of the mountain. I paused for a moment, my senses on edge, but I forced myself to walk towards the center. My orders were clear: meet the contact, get the information, and return. That was it, no questions. Quiet, no fuss. The fog was so dense up here that I genuinely couldn't know for certain if the person I was sent to meet was there or not. But as I hesitantly made my way forward, something changed. The air thickened, the temperature dropping even further, until I could see my breath hanging in the air like smoke. I didn't understand it. The cold wasn't normal. It wasn't just winter cold. It was a deep, unnatural cold that seemed to come from the very ground beneath my feet and encompassed me up to the tip of my scalp. And then I heard it, a voice, low, guttural, and ancient. "Tommy McGrath." I froze. It wasn't a human voice. It was older. It came from the earth itself, from the stones. It was as though the mountain was speaking directly to me. My heart raced, my hand instinctively reaching for the pistol at my side. "Tommy," the voice repeated, "you've been chosen." The words echoed in my head, vibrating through my bones. And with that, he turned around and slowly walked away unnaturally, back into the trees. As I turned and ran, my feet stumbling over the uneven ground, I felt the darkness closing in around my mind. The mountain's voice echoed in my ears, a low, suffocating hum. "You were never meant to leave." And when I finally looked back, all I saw was the fog and the cold, empty stones of the Mourne Mountains. And I knew then that I was lost, forever. I've lived a long life, left the IRA, started a family, and made the best of the world despite the things I'd done as a soldier. But through all of it, the call of the mountains has never left me, never given my mind true peace. The mountains of Morna want me to come back, and I don't know how long I'll be able to resist their pull. My wife's been dead just over a year now. My son never came back from America for longer than a week at a time once he finished college and moved there to pursue some dream or the other. I'm just an old man with declining health living alone in the same old Belfast street, and the Mornas haunt me more than ever before. I fear the day I'll give in and give myself to the mountains, let them take me fully, but I often wonder if maybe they already have. The war was never meant to end. It was meant to feed the darkness forever.